Hello.
Hello.
So, we're here today to do the demon sleepover about Dantalian. And I have my friend and roommate here with me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kelia. That's it. That's who I am.
And my friend works with Dantalian sometimes. So I thought it would be good to get this perspective, and especially on working with entities, working with demons specifically, and working with Dantalian, and kind of what goes into that. So I think we decided we were going to start kind of broad and then narrow it down. So we were going to start with the idea of working with these entities.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
what we had talked about?
We can start there.
Okay.
So, there's a couple of things, just for context, that I kind of want to get out of the way is, also these gummies are great.
Yeah, these are the best gummy bears.
They're so good. I tried them earlier and they're fantastic. But so one of the first things that I'd like to kind of get out of the way is that there's this idea that Solomon, in the mythology of it, dominated these entities and made them serve him. And I think it's more important to think of it as not dominion or domination, but as communion. It's important to keep in mind that any entities that you work with that are outside of the human experience and the human realm have their own will. It's not exactly like human will. It doesn't look the same and it doesn't always act the same, but it's still a will nonetheless. So I just want to provide a little bit of that context first. And then the second thing is understanding why people interact with, or might interact with, these kinds of entities in the first place. And I think it's important to understand your own motivations and to fully parse out what you desire from these kinds of interactions. Because it's going to make your experience communing with these entities much easier. It's going to be much clearer, and it's going to help you get to the place that you're trying to go. And I think that's what everyone wants, is they want to be able to clearly get to where they're trying to go without, too much interruption or complication. Yeah, so that's kind of the broad contextual thing. Do we want to talk maybe a little bit more about the history? Give kind of a broad overview of that, or?
Well, yeah, because we were talking about King Solomon, who of course was the one we look to when we're working with a lot of these entities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as far as the history is concerned, in King Solomon, himself, and again, kind of the mythology that surrounds that, the way that I know of it is it's told that, Solomon interacted with these entities and used them to amass great amounts of power and wealth, which is, something I think on some level humans can relate to, the idea of amassing all this security and all this good fortune. And so usually when people talk about demonology, they're kind of talking about it with that in mind, or with that kind of context applied to it. And that brings me to one of the other things that I think is important to understand about entity work, is that these things are not servants to human beings, and that human desires, while important, and do define a lot of these interactions, are not the only thing at play. And if you approach these entities with that mindset, I think you're doing yourself and them a disservice as well.
That's a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the other thing is this, the mythologization of the Ars Goetia happened, I think it's somewhere around the Middle Ages is when this started to become a thing. People were getting more and more obsessed with the idea of witchcraft, and the idea that it's this kind of big primal malevolent force. And of course a lot of Christianity is based on trying to repress that particular force. But along with that, kind of comes a lot of these misconceptions. And so another thing that I think would be important to kind of keep in mind about your experience with entities is that they're also not, they don't have a good or bad nature the way that people think about it. Interacting with angels and interacting with demons, as people refer to them, doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing good or bad work.
Definitely, because you can do good work using lower vibrational channels, and you can do bad work using, well, it's much harder, I think, to like approach angels and be like, I want to kill somebody for free.
Yeah, well, and I this is the other thing too that I think is important to understand is that the role that demons play in entity work and in magic is they play the role of liberator. Whereas angels are meant to give you rules and structure, or the interactions that humans seek out from angels rather are based around rules and structure. But with demons, it's liberatory. I want to be liberated from the constraints of the society, or I want to be liberated of the constraints of the fears that I have of myself of disobeying certain structures and certain rules. Because as we all know, rules only work contextually. They're not blanket, right? You can't just make a rule and then suddenly it becomes universal. That's not really accurate, at least in my experience of it. And so demons, from my perspective and my interactions with them, they play the role of liberator. They come along and they say, well, why are you feeling so much shame about this?
Right.
Why do you feel afraid of your own power? Why do you feel like you need to hold back?
Definitely.
So let's dish a little bit about Dantalion.
Yeah, we're here to gossip.
Or Dantalion. The thing about Dantalion is Dantalion likes many pronunciations of their name, and I think many interpretations of themselves. And I think you'll find that this is pretty consistent with most entities. Is they're not so concerned about the exact rules and pronunciations and all of these kind of structures and strictures that people follow. So sometimes you can refer to them as something slightly different, or if you're thinking of them and that thought is, an accurate representation of them, they're not really necessarily concerned with what you call them. And I think you can apply this idea to a lot of entities. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Dantalion. So Dantalion's specific role as I believe they're the 71st demon out of 72, as far as the mythology is concerned. And
I do have the crib notes pulled up over here.
Oh, cool.
If you want to say anything specific about it.
Oh, so the other thing that Dantalion is kind of known for is knowledge. Giving you practical and useful knowledge, usually kind of based around the sciences or based around things that you might find in the physical world, but is also said to contain all knowledge or have access to all knowledge. Now, this is a little bit different from some of the other demons. There are some demons that are concerned with the past or the future, whereas Dantalion is really more about knowledge in the present. So you're not necessarily trying to read the future. You're not necessarily trying to pull from some big historical context, but really just trying to give you knowledge that's useful to you now. And there are some other demons in the Goetic text that are really more concerned about the past, or they're really concerned about the future. But Dantalion's more of a right here, right now kind of entity.
Now, I do have a question, and this may or may not even be relevant. Like, I don't even know if this is how it works, but is Dantalion somebody that you would work with in conjunction with, like, using material from Ars Notoria or something like that?
Anything. I think the big thing to keep in mind with Dantalion is you're looking for more grounded, more practical things when you're working with Dantalion. You can think of Dantalion as kind of the Capricorn of the demons, right?
Okay.
Now, it is also said that Dantalian can influence the will of others and knows the will of others. And this is also true. But these abilities are, you wouldn't call on Dantalian to be like, oh, I have a love potion that I want to use. I mean, you could, and you might get that effect out of it. But the primary aspect of Dantalian is more of how do you teach this person to get the results that they want, as opposed to just giving them the results that they want. How do you teach the person to be better? In this way, Dantalian serves as a liberator of ignorance. Okay. I would like to be liberated from my ignorance. I would like to be liberated from the constraints of my ignorance. So as far as that is concerned, technically, yes.
Okay.
Technically, that's true. But on another level, I think Dantalian prefers to be a little bit more grounded and a little bit more of, dealing with like earthly knowledge. Well, maybe not just earthly knowledge, but practical knowledge, I guess, is more accurate.
Gotcha. And what advice would you have to somebody who is interested in approaching Dantalian specifically? You did mention they're very flexible about the pronunciation of their name.
Yeah, Dantalian takes many forms and many shapes. This is another characteristic that has been documented and brought out in a lot of the writings about Dantalian specifically, is that they're a demon with many faces, right? And that they look masculine, generally speaking, but that they have many appearances swirling within the one. And I think this also speaks to their nature as a bringer of knowledge and a bringer of perspective and liberator of ignorance, right? So I think as far as approaching Dantalian specifically, it's less about ritual. There are some demons where you have to call them into specific circles or shapes, or you have to do specific things to get the results that you would like when you're first interacting with them, and sometimes consistently when you're interacting with them.
Gotcha.
Dantalian's a little bit less formal than that.
Okay.
You can call on Dantalian without doing like a huge complex ritual, but it is important to come with respect. Dantalian knows your thoughts and your feelings, right? And knows...
Well, I mean, like, you're going to come with respect in most cases, but there are cases, I think, where there's more force is suggested. Is that kind of the deal?
Dantalian is not a... force is not necessary in this case. Dantalian's very reasonable. Sorry, didn't mean to...
No, you're fine. We're hanging out. We're having a sleepover.
Yeah.
We're roommates, so we have a sleepover every night, right?
Yeah. So Dantalian is... It's not... You don't need a lot of force to talk to Dantalian, and I think communicating with Dantalian is bring interesting conversation. Bring interesting desires to the table. That's a great way to get their attention. So if you come to them with mundane things, they're less likely to respond to you, because they'll be like, well, you should be able to solve that.
Or this is uninteresting to me.
Yeah, this is uninteresting. If I try to think of it like this, if I had all the knowledge that Dantalian has access to, I would be bored by very trivial things.
Yes.
And so that's kind of one consideration you want to bring with it. And then, of course, the other thing is if you do bring an offering, generally an offering that's based in more intangible things is going to be more interesting, right? So there are some demons who respond to like very specific materials. Dantalian's a little bit looser in that way. Okay. Sometimes writing like one of the things that I will sometimes do is I'll write like like a symbol of a language that I've dreamed up or something like that. Okay. Because one of the things that I do for fun is I, invent different little imaginary languages.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I've been doing it since forever, but it's not really something that I put to use a lot of the time. It's just something fun that I like to do. But I'll write out a symbol or something like that, and I'll use that as a calling and be like, here, take a look at this thing that I've made, the symbol that I've made. What do you think of this? And that can be a good conversation starter.
That's good to know. Because that, I think, is something that gets glossed over a lot in entity work, is how to approach and get to know them. Like, obviously, we don't need to be making, like, pickup artist videos for entities. But...
Yeah, like...
But wouldn't it be silly if we did?
You know, like, this is how you pick up Dantalian, you know, on the street.
Right.
You know, they're really into that clover perfume, you know, so make sure, you know.
Right. But it's nice to think about them as, like, getting to know people, like, getting to know record executives, getting to know, but not seeing people or entities as, like, these commodities that we're trying to, like, stack up our belief systems here. We're just, we're interacting with these entities on terms that are based around our experiences in the physical plane. Because that's something I think that you had kind of touched on too, is that, these are non-physical entities, and so a lot of the things by which we are constrained, like, they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, they don't have the same limitations as far as physicality goes, and it's also important to add a little bit more context to this. It's also important to remember that physicality is not a weakness, right? That just because you're inhabiting a physical world that has rules and has consequences for various actions within it, that is not a weakness. Sure, it does keep you from doing things that you might otherwise do. For instance, you can't just jump off a tall object and fly, and that's disappointing. But
it's only disappointing that one time, though.
It's only disappointing once. So that's true. But it's disappointing that you may not be able to break all of the physical elements of this world to your will, because your will imagines things different to be. Like, the way that you characterize things is different than they actually are when you interact with physics. That's true. But that being said, you're physical for a reason. You're physical to have the physical experience, right?
Right.
And this is, not to get too into the solipsist way of thinking about this, because that has problems too. But the physicality of your existence is a necessity to a degree. Because if you were just immaterial, you would be only having the immaterial experience as opposed to the physical one as well, or other variations of that. So it's not a limitation, but it is a difference. And it's important to understand that there's a difference between that. And that when you interact with entities, or when you do any kind of magical work or anything like that, you're bridging a gap between two worlds that have entirely different experiences.
Exactly. And your perception is going to be based around your physical experience.
And your perception is going to influence the way that these entities interact with you. They're not servants of human will or human desire, but they do respond to it.
Right.
And so if you come into an entity experience and you have bad expectations, you may get a bad outcome as a result of that. Or if you come in with unnecessary attachment to certain ideas or certain ideals, you may have a negative experience with that. Not always. Sometimes there's grace. Sometimes things just don't work the way that you expect them to. But it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Definitely. Is there anything about the way that demons work with the physical plane that it's important to keep in mind?
Demons have no shame. It really, no physical entity has shame, but demons especially playing the roles of liberators, and the way that humans have interacted with them for so long. Demons are going to respond very strongly to what you might call your lower vibrational desires. Not because this is something that they're necessarily more attuned to on their own, or because that's the only thing that they can respond to, but just because it happens to be some of the strongest stuff that humans give off. human beings give off when they're feeling, think about when you feel really attracted to somebody and how almost kind of obsessive that can be.
Yeah.
Those are some really strong and intense energies. And so they're going to respond to those energies usually more acutely than they would to, say, your higher-minded selflessness kind of things.
Gotcha.
So it's important to be aware of that. Dantalian especially is, while being, very grounded in my experience, is also very attuned to what your desires are. Because it's one of their specialties is being able to understand your thoughts and your feelings. Not it's not a one-to-one thing.
Yeah.
They aren't reading your thoughts in the physical sense, right? And they're not reading your thoughts like verbatim, like as you think them, but they're reading the desires and all the ideas that you have attached to those thoughts. And so in that way, they're going to respond to those things. So if you approach Dantalian with a lot of intense anger or jealousy or any of these other kind of, lower vibrational things, they're going to know, and they're going to feel the effects of that. And that may color your experience with them. And I would say this is true of any entity, but especially with, knowledge-based demons that have a lot of understanding of the physical world, like Dantalian.
So what would be something that you might notice?
You may notice that your energy becomes more intense in the presence of Dantalian.
Okay.
You might notice that your knowledge becomes more acute and primal in that moment instead of thoughtful or complex. You may find yourself growing, simpler and more out of control. And the other thing that Dantalian will sometimes do is bombard you with so much knowledge that it accentuates the primalness of yourself. And this is in response to what you're feeling, and your perception of that thing. And they don't do this to be mean necessarily or to be cruel. Right. But it can be a negative thing. It can be something that comes back to hurt you.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, you might find yourself, looking for, like, maybe, this is maybe not the best example, but you approach Dantalian looking for the best cake recipe or something like that.
Okay.
And you may leave knowing the recipe to create homemade, explosives or something like that instead, because you're approaching with all this rage and all this anger or
okay, I
these
get what you're
intense kind
saying.
of feelings.
So use the birthday vibes.
Yeah, birthday
when
vibes,
you're broaching
birthday cake.
about birthday cake. But really, that's why I always encourage people to keep their vibes immaculate anyway, because, you just want to be bringing the best version of yourself that you possibly can to situations. When you're able to do that. And, we're all, most of us are humans here. And so you have to work within the constraints. And humans have their own foibles and things like that. And it sounds like a lot of these other entities do too. Like, obviously there's, different types of entities out there. Some more, I guess, kind of at what we think of as, the level of human intellect and intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them understand the human experience a little bit better. Not because they actually experience it, but because they've observed and interacted with humans for so long, that they've gained that kind of perspective on it. There's still some limitations there, right? They can't be human, just like you can't be a demon.
I don't know. If you work, I think if you're really good, or if you really work hard in your life as a human, you get to come back as whatever you want.
Well, once you die, you're no longer really human anyway.
Right.
You become something different, no matter what that is. You may not specifically desire to be like a demon as humans think of demons.
And we can go into transubstantiation in a different
Oh,
episode.
that's books and books and
Yeah.
books worth of material.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's get a little bit back more to Dantalian specifically and kind of do the gossipy, fun stuff. Let's let's get a little lower vibrational.
So what's
with
he
it.
like?
So Dantalian is a romantic type of being, and this is actually true. Most demons are like this, and the reason why they have this kind of romantic bent to them is because they carry a lot of passion, or like something that looks a lot like passion, I guess, is really more accurate.
Okay, that makes sense.
And again, because they react more to like primal desires and like unconscious desires, and again, because they're also liberators of these things, there's a general more sexual bend to them.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Dantalian is romantic about knowing things and about the liberation from ignorance, right? That's what gets Dantalian off in that sense, right? Just, learning new things, finding interactions that they haven't found before is very exciting.
Oh, okay.
That kind of thing. So they're more in tune to people who are able to provide them interesting and dynamic experiences. And of course, when other entities that are visiting Earth interact with them, or visit this universe in general, interact with them, it can also be more freeform because those desires don't exist in those cases, right? And so Dantalian can then fill up that empty space. And so humans can learn from this in the way that they can provide a bit of a blank slate. They can create a novel experience or an interesting experience, but then remove some of the attachment to that experience. And that creates this blank space that Dantalian can fill in for you.
Okay.
Because Dantalian, like all demons, as long as they're interacted with, with understanding and with compassion, the same way you'd interact with anything else, they want to do these things. Not all the time, but they do want to have, interactions with you.
Yeah. Rule number 3, always make it easy for them to do favors for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Make it as easy as possible. You wouldn't walk into a room talking to your friend and be like, now do this right now.
Right.
Now go get me this thing right now.
And even if you ask somebody real nicey, sometimes they still won't do it.
Exactly. And this is, again, they have a will of their own. And outside of the human experience, they're doing things that humans cannot imagine doing because humans don't share the immaterial experience, right?
Right.
They have a whole host of experiences that there are no words for. There's no way to fit them into the human experience, and so it's important to keep that in mind. They're not just here for you.
Right.
They've interacted with you by choice.
Right.
So, but yeah, Dantalian's very turned on by knowledge. Dantalian's turned on by the creation of knowledge. So if you imagine things or make up new systems or ideas, mathematics is a particular pleasure. Not all mathematics. There's actually another demon for that that's pretty famously for mathematics. But Dantalian loves symbology, or symbolism, I should say, because symbology is not a word.
Right.
But loves symbolism, loves new symbols, loves new languages, loves new categorizations, things like that.
Okay.
So that can be one way in which you can make things easier with your interactions with Dantalian specifically.
Gosh, my nose is so itchy. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I've been like playing with my mask, and
Yeah.
so
Well, I apologize to you, and I also apologize to our studio audience at home for itching my nose. It's allergy season, and so I'm just gonna apologize and continue to itch my nose. I hope that's okay.
It's totally fine. But yeah, this is, you want to make these experiences exciting, and you want to make them fun, and that's such an important thing that I think is lost in magical practice, is have fun.
Right, ceremonial magic shouldn't be something you think of as like this sterile, it's not like a laboratory environment. It's like you want to be able to feel things. You want to be able to see things. You want you're basically creating that environment that brings in the atmosphere in which that invocation can occur.
Mm. Absolutely. And there's no, despite what a lot of texts might say, rules in the material are different than what you would see as rules in the immaterial. In fact, the immaterial doesn't have hard delineated rules, right?
Right.
The immaterial is a somewhat unconscious kind of place, or in some ways it resembles the human unconscious, where things that seem nonsensical exist, things that seem to operate outside of any structures exist. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that you don't have to create these really disciplined rituals, especially in demonology and in demonism. If you find yourself doing that, I think that says a lot more about your fear of the practice of demonology and interacting with demons than it does about the ritual itself.
That makes sense.
Yeah, keeping it, with all of this, it's important to just remember that you should trust your instincts. Well, first you should hone your instincts, and then you should trust them. And you should enjoy the experience. If you're not enjoying the experience, why are you even having it?
Don't do it, yeah. For sure. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or talk about?
I mean, we've covered quite a bit.
Awesome.
I think, yeah, I think we've done a pretty okay job kind of going over it. There's, obviously this stuff is complicated, and there's a lot more that I could talk about that relates to the context of demonology. But I don't, I think this format, it would just be boring, and I don't want to give a dissertation or give a lecture on it, but I do want to leave one last thing in mind, which is that, well, now I lost it. Where was I going to go with this? It was
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I ruined it.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. That was the thing, which is, be whatever that it is that you want to be, right? When you're doing this work, allow yourself to fully become that thing. And I would hope that you would want to be the better version of yourself, and that you would want to bring, good things to yourself and good things to others. Because, good things that happen to you don't just happen to you. They happen to everyone around you as well.
That's true. That's really true.
And I would hope that that's what you want. But also be lenient with yourself. Don't punish yourself. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself for these things. Just allow yourself to be yourself, whatever you are in that moment.
Kelia, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Obviously, I'm a big fan of your work. And I wanted to have you come and hang out for a while, and I thought that the Demon Sleepover is the perfect format in which to hang out with your friends and talk about magic. So I hope that you guys enjoyed hanging out with us today. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you very soon.